What if the most feared man in your workplace, the rude, untouchable CEO millionaire everyone avoids, was finally confronted by the quietest, lowest-ranked employee, and that single moment changed everything forever? Stay with this story until the very end, because what begins with fear will slowly turn into courage, and what starts as cruelty will reveal a truth no one expected. If you enjoy emotional stories that touch the heart and restore faith in humanity, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel, Soul of Kindness, because stories like this deserve to be shared. In the heart of the city stood a towering glass building where ambition lived and fear breathed quietly in every corridor, a place where employees walked faster, spoke softer, and learned very quickly that one name alone could freeze a room: Adrian Blackwell. He was the CEO, a self-made millionaire whose success story was admired in business magazines but dreaded inside his own company. People said he had built the empire with sleepless nights and iron discipline, but those who worked under him knew a harsher truth. Adrian Blackwell ruled through intimidation. His presence was enough to silence laughter, his gaze sharp enough to make experienced managers second-guess every word. Mistakes were not corrected, they were punished, often publicly, and apologies meant nothing to him because he believed fear produced excellence. Employees warned each other like survivors of a storm, sharing stories of sudden firings, humiliating meetings, and the cold, emotionless way Adrian dismissed people as if they were replaceable parts of a machine. On the ground floor of this same building was a small cafe, simple and warm, almost out of place in a corporate world of steel and glass, and it was there that Maya Lewis began her first day as a cashier. Maya was young, soft-spoken, and carried a calm strength shaped by hardship rather than privilege. Life had taught her resilience early: loss, financial struggle, and long nights wondering how to survive, but it had also taught her something rare: self-respect. She greeted customers with gentle smiles, listened more than she spoke, and treated everyone the same whether they wore tailored suits or janitor uniforms. On her very first shift, her co-workers pulled her aside and whispered warnings filled with nervous glances toward the elevator. "If the CEO comes down, be careful," one said. "He hates mistakes." Another added, "Don't talk back, ever." Maya nodded politely, absorbing their fear, but something about it made her chest feel heavy. Not because she was scared, but because she felt sorry for people who had learned to shrink themselves just to survive a job. Hours passed, and the cafe buzzed with the usual rhythm of office life, until suddenly the room fell into an unnatural silence. The doors opened, and Adrian Blackwell walked in. His tailored suit, sharp expression, and commanding posture instantly changed the air. Conversations stopped. Cups paused mid-air, and even the sound of the coffee machine felt too loud. Maya noticed the tension immediately but continued working, unaware that she was about to face the man everyone feared. Adrian stepped up to the counter without acknowledging her presence, ordered his usual coffee in a clipped tone, and checked his phone as if she were invisible. Maya prepared the drink carefully, focused and calm, determined to do her job well. When she handed it to him, he took one sip, his expression darkening instantly. "This is too hot," he snapped, his voice loud and sharp, turning heads across the cafe. Maya blinked, surprised but composed. Before she could respond, Adrian continued, his words cutting and unforgiving, criticizing her competence, her training, and her worth in a way that made the room feel smaller. People stared at the floor, hearts pounding, waiting for the familiar outcome. The cashier apologizing repeatedly, shrinking under his authority. Maya felt the sting of humiliation rise, but with it came a deeper memory of every time life had tried to silence her, every moment she had swallowed injustice just to survive. Her hands trembled slightly, but not from fear. Slowly, she lifted her eyes and met Adrian's gaze, something no one else dared to do. The room held its breath. Maya spoke, not with anger, not with disrespect, but with a quiet firmness that carried weight. "Sir," she said evenly, "I can remake the coffee, and I apologize for the inconvenience. but I don't deserve to be spoken to like that." The words fell into the silence like a stone into still water. Shock rippled through the cafe. No one had ever spoken back to Adrian Blackwell, especially not a cashier. His eyes narrowed, disbelief flashing across his face, and for a moment it seemed like the storm everyone feared was about to break. But something unexpected happened. Adrian froze. He stared at her, not as a superior looking down, but as a man confronted with something unfamiliar, dignity that refused to bow. Maya continued, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "Respect doesn't disappear when someone makes a mistake," she said softly. "It's what makes people do better." Time seemed to slow. Employees waited for the explosion, the firing, the consequences they were sure would follow. Adrian said nothing. He looked around at the terrified faces, then back at Maya, took the cup without another word, and walked out of the cafe. The doors closed behind him, and the room erupted into whispers, disbelief, and fear for Maya's future. Some looked at her with admiration, others with pity, convinced she wouldn't last another day. Maya, however, returned to her work quietly, her heart racing but her spirit calm. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She had not betrayed herself, and in a building ruled by fear, that simple act of courage had just planted the seed of a change no one saw coming. The moment Adrian Blackwell disappeared behind the closing cafe doors, the silence shattered into anxious murmurs, and every pair of eyes turned toward Maya as if she had just committed an unforgivable crime, some staring in awe, others in pure terror, because everyone in that building knew what usually followed even the smallest act of defiance. And yet Maya stood there quietly, wiping the counter with steady hands, her heart still pounding but her posture unbroken, aware that fear was now circling her like a shadow but refusing to let it define her. While coworkers whispered warnings that she should start looking for another job, that no one spoke to the CEO like that and survived, yet Maya only smiled faintly and said nothing, because deep inside she felt a strange peace, the kind that comes when you finally speak a truth you have carried for too long. And when her shift ended that evening, she walked out of the glass building under the fading city lights, wondering not if she would be fired, but whether she would regret staying silent if she ever faced that moment again, and she realized she wouldn't, because dignity mattered more to her than security. And that night she slept lightly, memories of Adrian's cold eyes and the cafe's frozen silence replaying in her mind, until morning arrived sooner than expected, with a sharp knock of anxiety when her phone buzzed with a company email summoning her to the top floor, directly to the CEO's office. A message so short and formal it made her chest tighten, yet instead of panic she felt resolve, reminding herself that she had faced far worse than a powerful man with a title. As she entered the building that morning, the atmosphere felt heavier than usual, employees whispering behind their hands as she passed, some offering sympathetic glances, others avoiding her entirely as if her courage were contagious and dangerous. And when she stepped into the elevator, its slow ascent felt like a countdown, each floor carrying her closer to an outcome no one could predict, until finally the doors opened to the executive floor, quiet and immaculate, and she was escorted into Adrian Blackwell's office, a space as intimidating as its owner, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, dark furniture, and an air of absolute control. Yet Adrian was not sitting behind his desk as she expected. Instead, he stood by the window with his back turned, hands clasped tightly as if holding something together inside himself, and for a long moment he didn't speak, making the silence feel heavier than any insult. And when he finally turned around, Maya noticed something unsettling. His eyes held exhaustion rather than anger, and his voice, when it came, lacked its usual sharp edge, as he asked her a simple question that no one expected. "Why weren't you afraid?" And the question caught Maya off guard because it wasn't an accusation or a threat, but genuine curiosity. And she answered honestly, telling him that fear had already taken enough from her life, that she had lost people she loved, struggled to survive, and learned that allowing others to crush her spirit would only make her life smaller. And as she spoke, Adrian listened, really listened. His jaw tight, his expression unreadable, and when she finished, she expected dismissal or punishment. But instead, he asked another question, softer this time. "Do you know who you spoke to?" And Maya nodded, meeting his gaze calmly as she replied that she knew exactly who he was. But titles didn't change the fact that words could hurt. And for the first time in years, Adrian Blackwell had no immediate response, because her words reached a place buried beneath layers of ambition and resentment. A place formed long before he became a CEO, when he was a young man struggling to survive, believing that weakness invited destruction. And as the silence stretched, memories he had locked away surfaced uninvited. His father's harsh discipline, the humiliation of poverty, the promise he made to himself that no one would ever look down on him again. And suddenly he saw himself through the eyes of his employees, not as a strong leader, but as the very force of fear he once despised. And when he finally spoke again, his voice was low and controlled but changed as he told Maya that she had crossed a line. But instead of firing her, he surprised both of them by admitting that perhaps the line should never have existed in the first place. And Maya felt a flicker of shock, realizing this meeting was not about punishment but confrontation of a different kind. And as Adrian dismissed her without further comment, she left the office uncertain but hopeful, sensing that something important had shifted even if she didn't yet understand how. And over the following days, the building buzzed with quiet observation, employees watching Adrian closely for signs of his usual cruelty, bracing themselves for the return of the storm. But instead they noticed small, almost invisible changes. The way he corrected mistakes without public humiliation, the way meetings ended without anyone leaving shaken, the way his gaze lingered thoughtfully instead of burning with impatience. And while fear didn't disappear overnight, something unfamiliar crept into the workplace, something fragile but powerful. Hope and Maya continued working at the cafe, serving coffee with the same calm kindness as before, though now she sensed Adrian watching from a distance, not with authority, but with reflection, and each time their eyes met, there was an unspoken understanding between them, a recognition that a boundary had been crossed not in defiance, but in truth, and that a single act of courage had begun to unravel years of silence, fear, and unchecked power, setting in motion a change that neither of them could stop, even if they tried. The days that followed felt different in a way no one could quite explain, as if the entire building had taken a quiet breath after years of holding it in. And while Adrian Blackwell was still the same powerful CEO with the same demanding standards, the sharp edge that once defined him no longer cut as deeply, because something inside him had been unsettled by a single honest voice that refused to tremble, and employees began to notice the shift not through grand announcements or dramatic apologies, but through subtle moments that carried unexpected weight, like the way Adrian paused before speaking, choosing words with care, or how he listened without interrupting, his eyes no longer scanning for flaws but for understanding, and meetings that once ended with humiliation now ended with solutions, leaving people confused yet cautiously hopeful, as though they were witnessing a man relearning how to lead. And at the center of this unspoken transformation was Maya, still working behind the cafe counter, still dressed simply, still treating every customer with equal respect, though now she carried the quiet awareness that her courage had stirred something far beyond her role. And one evening, long after the last employees had left, and the city lights reflected softly against the glass walls, Adrian returned to the cafe, not as the feared executive surrounded by silence, but alone, his shoulders heavy with the kind of exhaustion that success could not heal. And Maya noticed immediately that this visit was different, because he didn't check his phone, didn't rush his order, and when she handed him his coffee, he didn't criticize or complain. He simply nodded and remained standing there, as if searching for words he wasn't used to speaking. And after a long pause, he asked if she had a moment, his voice low, stripped of authority, and though Maya was surprised, she nodded, sensing that this conversation was not about power, but about something fragile and deeply human. And they sat at a small table near the window, the city humming quietly outside as Adrian spoke of things he had never shared with anyone in that building, telling her about growing up in a cramped apartment where money was always short and anger always present, about watching his parents break under the weight of survival, about losing them too soon and promising himself that weakness would never again control his life. And as he spoke, the ruthless CEO faded, revealing a man shaped by fear long before he learned to wield it, and Maya listened without interrupting, understanding that sometimes the greatest kindness was simply to hear someone's truth without judgment. And when Adrian admitted that he believed fear was the only way to keep control, that respect had to be taken, not earned, Maya responded gently but firmly, telling him that fear built walls, not loyalty, and that strength didn't disappear when someone chose kindness. It multiplied, because people gave their best not when they were threatened, but when they were valued. And her words settled between them, heavy and undeniable. And in that moment, Adrian realized something he had never allowed himself to consider, that his greatest achievements were hollow if they left him alone, and that the power he clung to so tightly had cost him connection, trust, and peace. And the following weeks reflected that realization in ways that slowly reshaped the company, as Adrian revised policies that had long been accepted as harsh but necessary, introducing fairer schedules, open conversations, and opportunities for employees to speak without fear of retaliation. And while not everyone trusted the change immediately, the atmosphere began to soften, laughter returning to break rooms, collaboration replacing competition, and people who once counted the hours until they could escape the building now felt a sense of belonging. And through it all, Maya remained grounded, never seeking recognition, never using her influence for personal gain, because to her, the true victory was not in changing Adrian alone, but in restoring dignity to a place where it had been stripped away for too long. And one afternoon, Adrian called her into his office again, this time with a different energy entirely, offering her a position beyond the cafe, recognizing her emotional intelligence, her integrity, and her natural leadership. And though Maya was surprised, she accepted with humility, not as a reward, but as a responsibility to help preserve the culture that was slowly taking root. And as she stepped into her new role, she carried with her the same calm courage that had sparked everything, reminding everyone she worked with that change did not require shouting or authority, only the bravery to speak truth with respect. And as Adrian watched his company thrive in ways profit alone had never achieved, he understood that the most powerful moment of his career had not been closing $1 million deal or topping a business ranking, but standing silently in a cafe, confronted by a cashier who reminded him of the humanity he had buried beneath success. And in that realization, the once feared CEO began to heal, not through dominance, but through connection, proving that even the hardest hearts could change when met with courage and compassion instead of fear. Time passed, and what had once felt like a fragile experiment slowly became a living reality within the walls of the company, as trust replaced tension and purpose replaced fear, and employees who once measured their worth by how invisible they could remain now began to speak with confidence, knowing their voices mattered. And at the center of this transformation stood Adrian Blackwell, no longer the cold, untouchable CEO, but a leader learning each day how to balance strength with empathy. And though his authority remained unquestioned, it was now grounded in respect rather than intimidation, a change that surprised even him as he watched productivity rise alongside morale, proving that kindness was not a weakness but a force that could drive success more powerfully than fear ever had. And as the anniversary of the day everything changed approached, Adrian felt a weight settle on his conscience, a need to acknowledge the truth not in private reflection but publicly, because leadership, he had learned, was not just about making decisions but about taking responsibility. And so he called a company-wide meeting, filling the largest hall with employees from every department, from executives to interns, all buzzing with curiosity and anticipation. And when Adrian stepped onto the stage, the room fell silent, not with dread but with attention, and he began to speak not as a distant authority, but as a man owning his past, admitting openly that he had led through fear, that he had believed cruelty created excellence, and that in doing so he had forgotten the humanity of the people who helped build his success. And as murmurs spread through the crowd, he told them about a moment in a small cafe, about a young cashier who dared to speak with dignity when everyone else had learned to stay silent. And though he did not describe her as a hero, his voice carried deep gratitude as he explained how that single act of courage forced him to confront the person he had become. And then, to everyone's surprise, he called Maya onto the stage, and as she walked forward, the room erupted in applause that carried years of unspoken relief and admiration. And Adrian looked at her not as a superior but as someone who had changed his life, saying words that would be remembered long after that day. That this company had not transformed because of new policies or strategies, but because one person reminded them all that respect was not optional. And Maya, standing before hundreds of faces, felt a surge of emotion not from pride but from hope, because she saw in their eyes a reflection of what was now possible. And she spoke briefly, reminding everyone that courage did not always roar, that sometimes it spoke softly and still had the power to change everything. And as the meeting ended, something remarkable happened. People didn't rush back to their desks. They stayed, talking, laughing, connecting in ways that had once felt impossible. And the story of that day spread beyond the company walls, reaching other workplaces, inspiring conversations about leadership, dignity, and the quiet power of standing up with kindness. And Adrian found himself invited to speak not just about business success, but about human-centered leadership, sharing openly how fear had built his empire but nearly destroyed its soul, and in private moments, he often reflected on how close he had come to losing everything that truly mattered. And he never forgot the lesson Maya taught him, that true authority did not come from making others smaller, but from helping them grow. And as for Maya, she continued her work with the same humility she had always carried, mentoring others, advocating for fairness, and reminding people that their worth was not defined by their title. And though life continued with its challenges and imperfections, the company stood as living proof that even the most toxic environments could heal when someone chose courage over silence. And as this story comes to an end, it leaves behind a simple but powerful truth for anyone listening, that you don't need wealth, status, or power to make a difference. Sometimes all it takes is the bravery to stand up with respect and speak from the heart. And if this story touched you, inspired you, or reminded you of your own worth, please like this video and subscribe to our channel Soul of Kindness, where we share stories that uplift, heal, and prove that empathy still has the power to change the world.